Thank you. Thank you for everyone being here. Beautiful Existence, B3 are just a couple of my heteronyms. And if you're interested to understand what heteronyms are, reverb, echo. If you're interested to understand what heteronyms are, I did a series down below. I'll link it. This series, Omnidimensional Authors, the first in this series, was about Fernando Pessoa and, aspects of his different beingness. So yeah, welcome. Thank you for my subscribers. Thank you for all of those that participate. Please leave comments and the regular, like and share or subscribe. Today we have another one of our Omnidimensional Author series, and it is on Jean Elizabeth Leckie. This is a really interesting one. I first found about this omnidimensional author through a series of different omnidimensional authors at the turn of the century, namely female-born and identifying persons that were under law that was put together in the 1920s. I'm trying to remember exactly the year. Let's see here. Okay. The year was 1927, and it's called the Cummings versus Bond. And it basically was a lawsuit that established 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago, what I have now coined as a literary genre and personage of omnidimensional authors to help encapsulate and build bridges from past spellings, such as occult or esoteric, where a lot of this content has been kept under for over 100 years, also within the parapsychology areas of academia and scholarship. Because those words really mean private and secret, and our work has not been private or secret for thousands of years, for tens of thousands of years. In fact, in previous iterations of human cultures and civilizations going back tens of thousands of years, our work was exonerated, often was the case, and kept at the highest echelons of royalty and nobility and, and practice within many cultures and civilizations. And we know this to be true from, Mesopotamian and Sumerian texts and translations. So this legal precedence in the Cummings versus Bond case in 1927 basically set course internationally that if a spirit or ghost communicates a work to a living person via a medium, that the copyright belongs to the medium or the omnidimensional author, and it belongs to them rather than the spirit or any other transcriber or translator, because the original translation from the ineffable was done through the medium or the omnidimensional author. So this law, while often, kind of giggled at by legal, blogs and teams and persons throughout history within that industry, it actually has set a pretty important precedence. And so I found a couple of different omnidimensional authors many years ago when I started doing this research around who I consider myself as an omnidimensional author. And so today we're going to talk about Jean Elizabeth Leckie, who is also Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's second wife. So thank you for being here. And if you're here under the correct pretenses, then, like, share, subscribe. And if you're not, I send everything back to you tenfold, and you are welcome to leave. So with that said, Jean Elizabeth Leckie, was born in the 1800s and was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's second wife. They were married in 1907. A lot of people, so I'm going to kind of get into a little bit of history between these two because it really sets some context for one of, if not the prominent omnidimensional author pieces that Jean was a prominent part of, in fact, legally has set the parameter as the acting omnidimensional author and the rightful author of the work. That we'll eventually talk about. But there's a lot of controversy around some of these people. One of the other previous omnidimensional authors that I had found under the researching this Cummings versus Bond legal case and the legal precedence that was set within it in the 1927. One of the previous episodes that I've done, and I'll link it here below, and you're welcome to look through this Omnidimensional Author series, was another female-born and female-identifying person that supposedly did not want to be credited as an author, but because of such things as legal precedents and because of nuances of law, and also because they were married to another prominent author, Yeats. So I'll talk about these different cases where, female authors, and especially if they have this marriage to these really prominent writers and poets, how they kind of settled into the background, whether it was fully by their own intention, or, whether it was because of different norms within society and within their dynamics of their relationships and stuff. So what did I want to... The other omnidimensional author that I found when investigating Cummings versus Bond, and that I have another series for, is Georgie Hyde-Lees, or Georgiana, but she went by Georgie. So anyways, today let's talk about Jean Elizabeth Leckie and her life with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And if you read anything about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he's definitely known, as the author. He had a very versed life as well. He was a medical doctor, a practitioner of different medical areas, but he was also a really prolific author. He wrote letters all of the time, constantly, which we'll also get into, which kind of goes to some curiosities and maybe proving some things about Jean. And their marriage dynamic in the world. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is most noteworthy known as the author of Sherlock Holmes. But he had with his medical training and with just being raised around the time period of when the Psychical Society and a lot of the Spiritualist movement, was happening, and it was expanding into the Western worlds. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was very much a part of a lot of this, whereas there is not a lot of information for Jean up until the point that she was his wife and this prominent book that we'll talk about came into being, and her omnidimensional author, skills were there. Unlike Georgie, who was the wife of W.B. Yeats, and you can see this in the live that I did about her. She was very much, prolific in so many different areas of life, including her own, ineffable, spiritual, occult, or esoteric knowledge and practice. And so Jean is interesting. There's definitely, some curiosities here, some questions here, and I want to be able to kind of present this and get into this context before we get into the Omnidimensional Author book that she, is the OA for. And you can make up your own minds about this. I've done a bit more research into her because there are these questions. But so one of the first things that popped out to me is people that have went through Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's collections in his library, right? Of all the prolific letters that he wrote, because he really was a constant writer. Being known as a writer in this lifetime is definitely one of his highest accords. But he's also very much known as a spiritualist, and we'll get into a little bit of that here. But people that have went through Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's, libraries and collections have made noteworthy, discoveries, a couple of which is that he considered Jean the love of his life. He immediately supposedly fell in love with her when he met her when he was still married to his first wife, whose nickname was Touie. And so anyways, he met Jean around the time that they already knew that Touie, his first wife, was dying of tuberculosis. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote tons and tons of letters to Jean, after they were married. And in fact, that the times that they were separated, he was writing multiple letters a day to her. And he was very prolific like this, writing to a ton of people all the time. So his library and collections are very, very extensive. And you can see this spiritualist, this ineffable, occult, esoteric, interwoven thread coming from letters that he wrote his mom when he was away at medical school about attending, life after death medical, seminars, and in various areas. You can absolutely see this thread of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and his love, or his affection in some case, way, shape, or form of, life after death and ghosts and the whole ineffable realms and everything. So, his part in this OA piece, and he actually has many, many pieces. He even wrote some of this, his thoughts and his ideas and his beliefs into Sherlock Holmes in many different ways, but he wrote multiple other pieces that actually led up to the OA piece, which is entitled Pheneas Speaks. But he wrote multiple books that led up to Pheneas Speaks. The Vital Message in 1919, The New Revelation in 1917, that was even before The Vital Message, then came The Vital Message, and then came The Wanderings of a Spiritualist in 1921. Well, Pheneas Speaks was published in 1927, so you can start really seeing a timeline of a firm, definitive, understanding, practice, belief in, and activation within his life in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but you don't find that within Jean's life. There isn't obviously so many records of Jean's life, but we do have a good knowledge of her life prior to marrying Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So that was one of the first things that stood out, that his letters and his writing really showed and told this story of Jean being the love of his life in so many different ways. But the letters also shown and told that he had no letters to his first wife. He had no letters to a couple of people, including his father, who was estranged from his family as an alcoholic. And there are people that posit that it's because Jean destroyed them. Before they could ever be put into a collection, she destroyed them. So unfortunately, I have encountered multiple people with a particular name and nomenclature, like her middle name, Jean Elizabeth Leckie, that, if you're one of these people that has this name in this world, I hold no bias, but I have a very big curiosity about the spelling of your name. And we'll get into that, more of this context about Jean. So it wasn't just Conan Doyle's, letters that led to these curiosities about this person with this particular nomenclature that very much resembles the people that I know with that nomenclature in this lifetime. So they were married, but she had been having an affair with him while his first wife was dying. That is the consensus. In fact, his mother was in on it. Multiple family members were in on it. And she was described multiple times through interviews and various people knowing her or researching into her and her, interviews or letters back and forth of Doyle's or other people and correspondences, that she was a very determined person to get her way. Sometimes if you just have to sit there and keep trying and trying and trying to control everything around you, you'll eventually get what you want, but it might not come to you the way that you think it will. Anyways, they were married a year after his first wife died. And his first wife, actually, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had 2 children with his first wife. And the actions of Jean were very, very evident and known by many people that his first 2 children were not welcome in her life. In fact, she had 3 other kids with Conan Doyle. And as soon as they were married, she shipped them away. His oldest son, Kingsley, was already at like a military boarding prep school. But he had a daughter who was at home, who Arthur Doyle had been very, very generous with and very loving and very kind towards. And after he married and got involved with Jean Elizabeth Leckie, again, the nomenclature says it all. There's a spell there. All of a sudden, those children weren't welcome, and they received nothing. And even when Doyle's daughter begged to come back for Christmas, she was denied by Jean. In fact, when Doyle's first daughter from his first marriage went to Germany, I think it was Dresden, was shipped to a boarding school to get her out of their life, right? Any semblance of a first wife or anything, a threat of any kind, got rid of this child, was sent to. So Doyle's first daughter was sent to a singing school in Germany, and apparently, Jean was like an accomplished singer of some sorts, which I can't find any research to state that. She was some kind of accomplished something, singer, mezzosoprano or something like that. And when they finally did let Doyle's first daughter, who had now been at this singing and music school for a couple of years, to come back, Jean refused to sing with her and had Doyle wrote some scathing letter to her saying that she didn't have a voice and she had no future in it, and that Jean should know because, Jean is this high and flutent person, and just kind of felt like a lot of manipulation, which again really seems par for the course for that nomenclature. So, like I said, no offenses, no biases, but I do know a couple of people with this nomenclature in this lifetime, and it kind of seems to be a regular pattern for people with this name to have this manipulative nature. So, and this is coming from somebody who is an omnidimensional author, and who is also, saying that this work is very much an omnidimensional author work. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is kind of funny. It's just funny to think about, right? Do you know anybody with this type of nomenclature? Maybe they are also a manipulator. Maybe they are also a step monster. I love YouTube. The opinions are off the hook. Very much my opinion from my experiences. But it gets even worse than that. Not letting his own children come back for the holidays, saying horrible bad things about them, shoving them off into distant lands so that they don't have to deal with them. She's kind of getting you're getting kind of a sense of the way that people have interpreted her life. And Conan Doyle wrote prolifically throughout his life in letters, and has multiple letters and correspondences in his library and collection. So if people are making this kind of analysis by observing what's in his collection and interviews and things like that, then, there might be something there. Not all omnidimensional authors, valued who they were, valued their abilities or skill set. And if they did, maybe they valued them in a very egocentric way. Jean Elizabeth Leckie is kind of seeming like that. Manipulative, definitely bending things in her favor. And when we get into the book, Pheneas Speaks, we can talk about that a little bit more, because that is also another theme that people have had, about that particular book. So anyways, let's see, got lots of notes. I always have lots of notes. Try to break it down into an hour here. So Conan Doyle, like I said, he was very much of the, at least, curiosity of this whole spiritual movement and life after death, and a lot more outside of the physical world. He actually joined the Society for Psychical Research, which was one of the really prominent groups and societies at that time. He joined them in 1893, so well before he ever married Jean Leckie. So, he was involved in it, but he also had some things happen in his life that really catapulted him into this whole thing. So let's see, I can't remember. I didn't write this down. Okay, so one of the things that really, catapulted Conan Doyle into the spiritualist movement, even more, because he had been very curious about it for a long time. He had written a lot of pieces, even up to this point, like articles and stuff for different journals. But unfortunately, it was his son Kingsley's death in 1918, when Kingsley was only 25 years old. Kingsley died of influenza, the influenza epidemic during World War I. And he died in London. And honestly, when you look into Kingsley, which was his oldest son from his first wife, remember, Jean had shoved these kids out of the way to have her, dreams and fantasies come true, which in some way, shape, or form did, because it was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And so she became Lady Conan Doyle, or whatever, whatever her aspirations were. This is probably as much as she's going to be known for as an omnidimensional author, honestly, over a lifetime. Because, like I said, the verdict is kind of in, and because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle kept such prolific writing and letters and correspondences, it's not very hard to see what kind of person Jean actually was in life. But that doesn't discount that, she had these alternative abilities, or that she had practiced them, and that she had been honing them in, and absolutely was an omnidimensional author. But for Conan Doyle, after Kingsley died, I get the sense that he had a lot of guilt, that he had, allowed this to happen with his wife, even though this was the love of his life. And he had 3 other kids by her. And of course, there's, kind of this, I don't even know what to call it. There's this thing that, men want to keep their wives happy or whatever, and that they'll do whatever they have to. I had a grandfather that had this happen to him, where his first wife died of supposed milk poisoning, but he was already having an affair with who became his second wife. And my grandfather was the oldest of like 7 kids that they had on this Montana farm at the turn of the century. And after his mom died, and his dad very quickly married this other woman and had 2 other children with her, right after they got married, she shipped all of them, not to prep schools, but to an orphanage. She sent all of the children from my grandfather's first marriage, and he was old enough to not go to the orphanage because he was the oldest. So he went into the Merchant Marines, and he helped pay to get out all of his siblings as much as he could in his young adult life. My grandfather was an amazing human being, not so much maybe the predecessors of his kin, but he was an amazing human being. And so I have seen and heard the stories, the horror stories of people that were horrible stepmonsters to other people's children, and have long held the conviction that there is a special place in hell for those kind of people. So, Jean is kind of striking me as this similar type of person, but Conan Doyle really had remorse in his life after Kingsley died. He died very young. He was a beautiful young man. By all accounts, he was, doing a good job in the military. He had kind of sideswiped this whole BS with his dad's second wife and appeasing her and all of this stuff, right? So I think that he really sunk into the spirituality to deal with his remorse and his regret about treating his older children like that, and even his first wife. Because one of the interesting things that people have found out about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's extensive library and collection of correspondences is that he doesn't have any letters to his first wife or his father, 2 people that Jean specifically wanted to keep estranged. Destroying evidence of other people, like boxes of memorabilia and, their kids' clothes and all sorts of stuff like that. Yeah, special place in hell. Special place in hell. So, it was very interesting also, and we'll get into this in Pheneas Speaks here, but there were other, parts of Jean that were not so pleasant. But like I said, it doesn't mean that she's not an omnidimensional author, because she absolutely is. It's just that omnidimensional authors have very, very wide gamut of life stories, wide gamut of life stories. And Jean, in a lot of ways, is feeling like an opportunist and a manipulator. And that this one omnidimensional author piece very much could be mostly from an intentional manipulation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Because if you look at the timeline of stuff, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was very much into spiritualism and the spiritualist movement for many, many decades, well before he even had met or married, Jean Leckie. But, after his son died, there was this exponential increase in his output related to, you know, spiritualism and life after death and being able to correspond with the dead. And in fact, you know, his son Kingsley dying in 1918. The books that I told you that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote leading up to Pheneas Speaks in 1927, you can see this cadence starting to really come out in him. But so the first one is the New Revelation, and that was in 1917, a year before Kingsley died. But then right after Kingsley died came the Vital Message, and then within a couple of years, the Wanderings of a Spiritualist. I really believe that he was having a great deal of remorse because he did not value the life, you know, of his son in the ways that he necessarily wanted to, or that he allowed, mostly because of Jean and because of this nature that she had, which we'll get into a little bit more here. So, what do I want to say? Where do I want to go with this? So one of the things about, you know, Jean and Jean's automatic writing. So Pheneas Speaks has some contradictions in it compared to what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about Jean's mediumship in the intro, compared to interviews that she had. Like immediately there's contradictions there, and there's multiple contradictions in a lot of ways within their life and what they did with other people, but within this book and within things that they said about this book, which also goes to speak to that, you know, while I'm not going to discount that this is an omnidimensional author piece and that Jean is an omnidimensional author, you know, there are definitely things within it that, like I said, make you question the intention behind it. But overall, this is automatic writing. It was described by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle multiple times. He observed it within Jean, you know, and it's considered what I considered an alternative ability of an omnidimensional author through automatic writing, or what is also called, or has been called, psychography. So basically, one of the other things that really happened, and it was in this timeline, and I really should put a timeline in the notes of this YouTube live, because it'll really help you. I know I'm kind of bouncing back and forth a lot, but it'll really help you see a lot clearer what other researchers have seen, and predominantly through Doyle's, you know, prolific communications with multiple people, is that, you know, he had a very solid trajectory and some couple of instances that happened in his life where, you know, you can feel this sense of shift within him, where he was like all in, right? He had been questioning, then practicing, and questioning, and, you know, getting further and further into these alternative abilities and the ineffable. But then he had Kingsley die, and it was just like he was all in. And what was so interesting when you see this timeline is, you know, Kingsley dies in 1918. He writes this book about the wanderings of a spiritualist in 1921. You know, they've already been married for a while. There isn't anything about after they get married about her, except for these communications with her, you know, shoving his first children out of their life. She had these little kids, all of this stuff. But after Doyle got like really like all in about spirituality after Kingsley's death, it was only a matter of a couple of years until Jean was also suddenly all in. She wasn't like Georgie Hyde-Lees with W.B. Yeats, where they both had this spiritualist understanding and practice and reverence for the ineffable. Jean was very much more feeling like an opportunist. She was fake. She was false. But I don't say that her omnidimensional authorship is false, nor is this piece false. It very much is, because Pheneas Speaks is multiple channeling sessions over the course of 5 years. If anybody does anything over the course of 5 years, there is a semblance of some understanding within that practice that will eventually shine through as true. And this absolutely does. Pheneas Speaks is an omnidimensional author piece, and Jean Elizabeth Leckie is an omnidimensional author because of it. And because of also the Cummings versus Bond rule in 1927. But when you look at this timeline and you see Sir Arthur Conan Doyle losing his son, and for all of those years prior, having Jean push his children from his first marriage out of his life so profusely, and many correspondences with his daughter and his son, go to show this as well, that Jean was an opportunist. She was absolutely just a manipulator in some regards. And it's just evident from multiple people. And Pheneas Speaks, a lot of people have critiques about it too, because it was just interesting how Jean just seemed to have, all the right things to say to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. She was recalling the right people, not his first wife and not his dad. But she was, channeling all the right people, and they were saying all the right things. And yes, maybe there were some predictions in there. It seems that he absolutely believed that they were predictions, and that, they rightfully could have been predictions coming from the ineffable and these various beings that Jean interacted with and received communications from, namely Pheneas. But there's still a lot of questions that there's a real opportunist kind of bent to Pheneas Speaks, that a lot of these channelings had a lot to do with, trying to, help Sir Arthur Conan Doyle ease the pain of losing Kingsley, which, if Jean Elizabeth Leckie had any kind of heart and remorse for shoving those first wife's children out of his life, maybe she was trying to do things like find the right channeled message to help ease her husband's pain because of the guilt of what she had been doing. Maybe if she had a heart, maybe. So anyways, let's get into Pheneas Speaks. Oh my gosh, I almost missed one of the most important aspects of the context of their life. Oh my gosh, okay. So because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was like all in as a spiritualist, and he made the rounds, and he was going to seminars, and he was talking about it, and he was, writing things in books and articles saying, I'm all in, and this is what's happening, and all of this stuff, he became friends with Harry Houdini. Now, Harry Houdini, while most people know him as, the most prolific magician in history, or one of the most top ones, he also, had started in vaudeville, and it's known that he and his wife at the time, I think he was only married once, I think that him and his wife possibly, but definitely him, had held seances during his vaudeville days to put money on the table that were fraudulent. So, he was a magician. He was a trickster. He was a very prolific trickster. And he also had conjured or delved within spirituality to the point of making money. And so he had that as part of his background. But when he became more noteworthy and known, obviously he wasn't, doing any of that. He had actually turned a complete corner in that regard. After he became everything that he wanted to become, he still lost his mom, somebody who was very, very dear to him, wanted to, and still at that time had some kind of belief in the afterlife, and being able to possibly conjure her up because there probably was some kind of trauma there still. And when he had went to many mediums to try and conjure his mom up, and I don't remember if it was one in particular. I kind of think that it was one in particular, but over the course of trying to connect with his deceased mom, Harry Houdini came to this drastic realization that all of these mediums in the spiritualist movement were frauds. And then he had that background where he had been a fraudster himself, holding fake seances and the such to just put money on the table, right, and pay his bills before he was very well known. So he had actually started to become, in the course of, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and his friendship, they kind of had this like friendly, not animosity, but debate between them, because they both really wanted to believe that there's another side, that there are other dimensions, that beings, and souls, take on other forms and can still communicate with us in some way in this material realm. But Houdini started going down the path of becoming a high skeptic of mediums and mediumship and alternative abilities in this regard, because prominently he was not receiving the information about his mom that would make him believe that it was his mom, and because of his history. But he still stayed in a friendship with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was all in. Now, of course, he had Jean at this time encouraging Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, because they published Pheneas Speaks in 1927, but in his intro, it says, for the last 5 years, which means that minimally since 1922 or 1921, Jean had been channeling Pheneas and other beings to compile Pheneas Speaks, right? You could say 1920 at the earliest, but 1921, 22, until they produced Pheneas Speaks. What was interesting is that the kind of nail in the coffin between Harry Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's friendship actually came with Jean being inserted into the middle purposely. So, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Jean had been touting her mediumship abilities and her automatic writing abilities for a while. But it was in 1922, okay? So maybe kind of towards the beginning of Jean being a medium and doing these automatic writings and channelings. In 1922, in Atlantic City, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Jean Elizabeth Leckie had invited Harry Houdini to their hotel room for a very private seance to conjure up Harry Houdini's mother. And Jean failed miserably. So, of course, Harry Houdini, who was already a skeptic at this point, was cordial because this was his friend, and because maybe there was some level of just being curious, because this is his friend's wife, about her alternative abilities. But basically what has been stated, and there might be other reasoning, but these are two of the prominent reasonings from Harry Houdini as to why he felt that Jean Elizabeth Leckie, it was a fraud, and did not have alternative abilities, and was a manipulator, is because she automatically channeled supposedly Harry Houdini's mom, deceased mom, in that session, and wrote pages and pages of automatic writing. And on one of those pages, she had an upside down cross, and she wrote the whole thing in English. Harry Houdini afterwards, I don't know if it was after the seance, or if it was at some point afterwards, after they had left, had remarked that it was false, and that she had not indeed channeled his mom, because his mom only spoke German and Yiddish and was a Jew. So that's, he was already a skeptic, and he was looking for ways to discredit mediums at that point. So he definitely came into that seance with a bias, but it put a nail in the coffin between his friendship with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's friendship with Harry Houdini. And Jean was at the middle of it. In fact, it kind of seems like Jean Elizabeth Leckie is in the middle of a lot of different controversies for a man who was suffering from, various, traumas with his child dying early in age, and other, parts of his life, his first wife dying, cheating on his first wife with this person, letting her do horrible things to his oldest children. Just seems like an opportunist to me. Seems like a manipulative opportunist to me, honestly. But like I said, you can form your own opinions. There's a lot of research out there. So let's get into Pheneas Speaks. We have like about 15 minutes here. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to this. It is all very, very interesting. Like I said, there are so many omnidimensional authors out there for thousands of years. So the stories that we're going to get into about the omnidimensional author genre and personages and their different, life around the piece or the pieces that they produce that have put them in this canon, this goes to show, Jean goes to show that even if a person really could be considered a manipulative person, and that their alternative abilities could have seriously and still are seriously within question of people, I have done the research on this person and looked into the work, and it is absolutely an omnidimensional author piece. I am standing by that. Jean Elizabeth Leckie is an omnidimensional author, because the history of her channelings, her automatic writing, and what she produced is so continuous with other mediums, with my experience as a medium, and with channeling, and with, translating the ineffable. Like I said, if anybody practices something for long enough, there is an semblance of truth that will come through it. And that semblance of truth has put Jean Elizabeth Leckie in Omnidimensional Authors canon. So Pheneas Speaks. Yes, now we know there is manipulation, probably. At least seriously questioned by many academics and other persons that have researched Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's life and her life. And, just her actions alone for many years towards various people go to show that this major literary piece, unfortunately, that she is the omnidimensional author of, even though she is not mentioned, again, married to another prominent male identifying born author at the turn of the century, and not cited at all, which I believe really has to happen at some point because of the Cummings versus Bond 1927 ruling. Whether they wanted to, her or other omnidimensional authors that were born and lived as female identifying, especially those under the guise of other more important male identifying persons, they need to have their names cited in these omnidimensional author pieces, because they are legally the author of these pieces, not their prominent writer or poet husbands. Those people are the translators. Those translators have no legal precedence for these pieces, and it doesn't matter as a person who she is. She did do something that I think ultimately will probably be one of the main things that she's known for, besides having other children who went out to then philander and manipulate other royal families that were also like the first lifestyle celebrities in the world. There's all sorts of just stuff about her offspring, who luckily did not have any offspring of themselves, so there is not a perpetuation of this whole BS. But some of her offspring went on to marry some very interesting people themselves, and I wonder where they learned it from. Like I said, the spelling of particular names just really holds true. Anyways, Pheneas Speaks, published 1927, noted by the author, the quasi-author, the translator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, was done for at least 5 years. So this started 1921, 1922, during the time of, or shortly after, their whole fiasco with the seance that Jean had for Harry Houdini's, dead mom that went terribly awry and was considered completely false by Harry Houdini. So one of the things that stands out as a contradiction in Pheneas Speaks to the type of manipulation that I've been telling you that Jean perpetuated to multiple people to be this, known as this great love of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's life, right? That he notably had remorse for after his son's death. It says in the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle writes in the intro, quote, "In April 1924, the writing mediumship changed to semi-trance inspirational talking. The medium never completely lost consciousness, but her hold upon her own organism was slight." Now, this in and of itself absolutely not only describes in a very, very generic way what another person will see and has seen and has commented on in my own channeling. And so I can resonate with him as an outside observer of a person using their alternative abilities to receive information from the ineffable. That statement really rings true. Like I said, it's a very generalized, very simplistic way to describe what they're possibly seeing and interacting with another human being that is in a channeling state of different dimensionality and receiving information. And so there are aspects of Pheneas Speaks and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's other pieces that definitely speak to the fact that Jean is an omnidimensional author and was using alternative abilities. Like I said, even the practice alone, depending, person depending, you can really be able to get into a rhythm and an understanding and a knowing of how to cultivate, remembering your alternative abilities and being that and absolutely being truthful and real within that state. And I do believe that Jean was truthful and real in that state, especially after, knowing that had been years that she had been practicing this. What is also of note, though, and that goes towards a pretty, big contradiction, is also within the intro when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle states, quote, "I would stress the fact, however, that much of the teaching is absolutely foreign to my wife's conscious convictions or to my own," end quote. I really think that he wrote that in the intro, which is right up there at the top of the intro, because this book was produced after that fiasco with Harry Houdini. There was some animosity after Harry Houdini had called Jean out as being a fraud after 1922 and that seance, incident between them. I think that he was being, protective. I get the sense that Jean, obviously he wanted to do something to aid to her credibility. And there's multiple remarks in the intro that go to speak towards aiding in Jean's credibility of being a medium and or an author, not and or, and an omnidimensional author. I mean, using her alternative abilities to receive information from the ineffable that translates into a literary piece. But, you know, I really do believe that he probably put that in there mainly because of this backlash from the Harry Houdini incident, because they were both kind of laughed at after Harry Houdini came out and said that Jean was a fraud. In fact, it was mostly Jean, but a lot of people have had sympathetic tendencies towards Sir Arthur Conan Doyle because they knew that he wholeheartedly believed in the afterlife and in different dimensionality and different beingness and people being able to come back. He had been in it and around it and practicing it for many decades before he was all in after Kingsley's death. You know, this is when Jean supposedly just became prolific as a medium, right? She didn't have a previous history of this. She, like I said, in my biased opinion and other people's opinion, was an opportunist. She was a manipulator. So of course, when her husband has this great remorse over a child that died that she had pushed away and purposely had pushed away from his first marriage, you know, there's incentive there to do something within the realms of what her husband believes to be able to soothe him. And most, like I said, many people have a very distinct opinion that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was really like, you know, what do you want to say? That he was, you know, a simple but manipulated man. That he was allowed to be manipulated, and for whatever reason, he held his own beliefs. He was a prolific writer. He was, you know, a medically trained specialist. He was his own person. He had enough of his own things in this world for people to know him noteworthy of. Jean Elizabeth Leckie feels like a leech, honestly. Again, part of the nomenclature of that spelling that I believe and that I've seen other people in the world to have of that name, a leech. They don't have enough of their own to do enough of their own. They have to suck hold onto somebody who has enough of their own authenticity, and they drain them and they manipulate them and they push people that love them out of their life so that they can control them. It's really actually twisted and perverse, and it's happening all the time. I know personal stories of it. In fact, my grandfather's, story that I shared is just one of many that I've known. Unfortunately, of male identifying and born persons that are allowing themselves to be manipulated. You don't have to allow yourself to be manipulated just because you're trying to keep the peace of your wife. Even if you consider this person the love of your life is going to take you down, is going to embarrass you internationally in front of everybody. No wonder everybody feels so sorry for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. They were married to Jean Elizabeth Leckie. It's really too bad that I have omnidimensional authors that are part of the canon that have such a distinctly known characteristic, of who they are, and that the piece that is an OA piece itself is questioned. But there are many things within this piece that are questionable, many things that are obviously made to soothe and to kowtow and to, again, manipulate Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was obviously in a state of bereavement and remorse and, just sadness for many years because of Kingsley and probably because of his first wife. He had people that were not, and situations and traumas in his life that the person that could have been aiding and abetting those traumas were trying to figure out a way to be able to help him. But it doesn't discount the fact that she still became that, or that she still was that at some point, because Pheneas Speaks is a channeled piece, no matter what, through automatic writing, through a psychography. So I brought up those two quotes, and in particular want to kind of end on this, because how could you not end on a nomenclature like Jean Elizabeth Leckie with a contradiction? Because, yeah, manipulation is just abound in this person's life. So besides the fact that she channeled all of these people that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle loved and had a part of their life, except for his first wife and his dad, and that there weren't any letters ever found pretty much in his entire collection of decades upon decades of prolific letter writing and communications to multiple people and back and forth. None of those letters were from his first wife. So obvious, Jean Elizabeth Leckie. Wow. So she had been interviewed in 1923 by the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, and this is online and you can see this. And yes, you can argue that the context of what she's saying in regards to her alternative abilities is different than what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote in the introduction to Pheneas Speaks only a couple of years later in 1927. We're talking 3 to 5 years between the two of these things. Her interview to the Brooklyn Daily Eagle and his introduction in 1927. So things can change, but we'll end it on a high note with Jean Elizabeth Leckie and her contradictions. In the interview, she states, "I do not enter a trance," when she's talking about her alternative abilities and how she's able to talk with dead people, because the article from 1923 is about Jean Elizabeth Leckie's ability to channel and talk to the dead. And she states in this article, "I do not enter a trance." It's kind of different than what Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote about Jean in 1927 in the introduction to Pheneas Speaks, isn't it? Again, when he says in April, quote, "In April 1924, the writing mediumship changed to semi-trance inspirational talking," end quote. So a year before that, she was saying, "I don't enter a trance." And then Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is stating in his introduction a year later that she started entering a trance state. So, there's various contradictions like this out there that you can find in Pheneas Speaks. This is just one of them. And like I said, this timeline is really important to understand about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's life and his children and his first wife and his friendships, and how Jean interwove a lot of those and how they became Pheneas Speaks in 1927. And it really sets a tone, like I said, for Jean's life and who she was and who she is seen as. And it gives a little bit of drama to omnidimensional authors, in our canon, because she might not have been the nicest person in the world. In fact, the entire omnidimensional author piece that she produced could have highly been manipulative and intentional and, a soothing to her husband's soul for acts that she was responsible also for. And that alienation of Kingsley after his first wife died, and just various things, the wedge that she drove in between him and one of his really great friends, Harry Houdini, with her supposed talents, right? All of that said, Jean Leckie is still an omnidimensional author. firmly believe that she needs to be cited as such for Pheneas Speaks under the Cummings versus Bond 1927 ruling. And yeah, that's pretty much most of anything that she's going to be remembered for in that lifetime. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, when he passed, he remembered everything. And she survived him by about 10 years. There's nothing noteworthy that she's ever produced since. It was all on the back of his wit and talent and ability and authenticity. And yeah, my opinion is that Jean Elizabeth Leckie is a leech and a manipulator, and that I feel sorry for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and that no man with that level of talent and ability should allow anybody, especially one with a nomenclature so kind of heavily known as being a manipulator, to allow another person to control their life and to control their life with their children like that. Because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle learned his lesson the hard way after his son was gone. And, you know, he, I believe, dealt with many years of remorse and dove deep, head in, all in to spirituality, because he did not see and did not allow, you know, the relationship with his son Kingsley to be as fruitful as it should have been because of Jean's manipulative influence and her own ego pursuits. So there you go. A little bit about Jean Leckie and her omnidimensional authorship and why she is in the OA canon. Anyways, it is now after 11. Thank you for being here. If you watched all of this, I appreciate it. We definitely have a varied canon of omnidimensional authors. Yeah, and I just think that it is so interesting that, you know, in my own life, it isn't just my omnidimensional authorship or my alternative abilities. It's when I start researching into these other OAs that I see these, you know, common threads, and it's not just the one common thread of, you know, having alternative abilities and translating the ineffable through them into a literary piece. You know, there are other things like my grandfather's story and the story of my own youngest child right now, which very much follows suit into a lot of this, especially the nomenclature of manipulators. It's just amazing to see how so many things have, you know, such a severity, a gradient of human experience within our canon. And it does not discount the fact that they are OAs and that they have produced, you know, literary pieces of some kind that do need to actually be cited professionally. So you won't find a whole lot of videos out there on this person. Like I said, she's not really well received with a lot of scholars and people with as much as known about her because of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's, you know, prolific letter writing and correspondences and communications and back and forth with multiple people. But she is in our canon and she's a spicy character. And yeah, it's probably going to be the only thing that she's actually really well known for in history. What is the moral of this story? Don't be an Elizabeth. And on that note, have a great Sunday, everyone.